On January 24, 1848, James Marshall found gold in the mill race of the water-powered sawmill he was building near the South Fork of the American River at what is now Coloma, California. Gold was the magnet which drew the adventurers. Gold created a timber market whose value would eventually eclipse that of the elusive metal. So, Michigan-California Lumber Company and its predecessors had a ready market for lumber, and they had vast forests of the finest quality. However, the pumpkin patches could be likened to a rose garden, lovely to look at, but look out for the thorns. One giant thorn was that the forests were on the north side of the awesome and intimidating American River Canyon, and the railroad tracks leading to market were on the south. Horatio Gates Livermore had visualized a harvest plan way back in 1866. Logs could be floated 40 miles down the American River, past the gold discovery site, to the sawmill he would build at Folsom. There was nothing radical about this idea. River log drives had long been successful in the east and on many west coast rivers as well. Livermore died in 1879, but two of his sons carried on with the project. In March of 1889, they formed the American River Land and Lumber Company. A mill at Folsom would require a dam to tame the turbulent river, a log boom upriver from the dam to catch the logs, and a canal from the boom to the mill pond. Convict labor for this project was provided by the state of California in exchange for land on which Folsom Prison was built. A hydroelectric plant was constructed, and a portion of the power produced drove the sawmill's electric motors, making it, when completed in 1896, the world's first electric-powered sawmill. Its 9-foot bandsaw could cut 50,000 board feet of lumber per 10-hour day. Logging operations started in mid-1890. A log chute was built to slide the logs from the north face of the canyon to the American River a quarter-mile below. Steam donkeys yanked the logs to a location level enough to hook up animal teams, which then moved the logs to the chute. Once the logs started down the sheer incline, their breakneck descent was slowed only by a thunderous plunge into the river. The first logs were sent down the river in the spring of 1891 and were intended to supply a small steam-powered sawmill at the boom site. This mill furnished timber products for construction of the main sawmill. Back in the timber, hauling logs to the chute with animal teams had become impractical as the distance increased. So in 1892, the first steam locomotive, a puny 040 Porter, was meanderingly delivered by animal team. Ties and timbers needed for the railroad were cut at a small mill near the log chute. In the summer of 1893, the Porter was put to work hauling logs to the chute from the logging camp which came to be known as Old Pino. In 1898, the railroad reached Pino Grande, a logging camp 9 miles from the chute, and the company acquired a real locomotive, a 2-truck, gear-drive Heisler. It too was delivered by animal team, as were several more north side engines. The loggers were splashing logs into the river. The main sawmill, completed in 1896, was ready to cut lumber. The only thing missing was logs. The log drives had been a hang-up since the first one in 1891. Rapidly receding water levels stranded most of the logs at Salmon Falls, 5 miles above the dam. The following year promised to be a repeat performance, until a drenching storm in December 1892 swept the logs down to the boom, which failed, and the logs plunged over the dam and down the river. Following years brought more disappointment than success, as less than average rainfall left many logs stranded. Then, in March of 1899, another gully washer overwhelmed man's best efforts and carried millions of board feet of fine timber through the boom and over the dam. Thus ended the efforts of the American River Land and Lumber Company to harvest the forests of the Georgetown Divide. Most of their plans had seemed reasonable, but a wild and unpredictable river defeated them, as it did all others who attempted log drives on Sierra Nevada rivers. The El Dorado Lumber Company was established in 1900 to buy the property and equipment of the defunct American River Land and Lumber Company. Their planning obviously did not include log drives. A flume or a railroad down to the valley were not impossibilities, but either would be very expensive and time-consuming. The directors boldly decided to move lumber across the canyon on a carriage suspended on cables. No one had ever attempted a cable crossing on anywhere near this scale. Legends are made by such make-or-break decisions. The cable was completed in July 1901 by the California Wire Company. The north cable tower was located near the now useless log chute. The south cable tower was 2,600 feet, half a mile, away. The cable was 1,200 feet, almost a quarter mile, above the river. A steam engine at the north tower provided power at first. For unknown reasons, the motive power, still steam, moved to the south tower in 1902. Rail cars loaded with 2,500 board feet of lumber were transported across the cable. 50 to 60 cars a day. 125,000 to 150,000 board feet could be handled. El Dorado Lumber Company built a new sawmill at Pino Grande. The steam-powered mill started cutting lumber in 1901 with a single 8-foot bandsaw. The 9-foot bandsaw from the Folsom Mill was installed in 1902. The mill had live lumber rolls, a ganged edger, and a 32-foot trimmer. It was state-of-the-art when built, and good enough to operate without major change until torn down in 1951. Two giant AC coreless steam engines provided the power, and the boilers delivering steam to them were fired with waste wood from the sawmill. Rough-cut timber products from the green chain were sorted and loaded onto rail cars, which were pulled to the north cable by gear-drive steam locomotives. There were 31 trestles to cross on the 9-mile trip. Building trestles was slow work, but not near as slow as nibbling away at mountains with picks and shovels. Mill output during the first 2 years was mostly for internal use, including building 9.5 miles of rail bed from South Cable to Camino. This link was completed in 1902. Lumber from Pino Grande now had a path to market. The open-air drying yards and dry kilns were situated at Camino, as was the box factory. The planing mill operated in Placerville for 2 years and was then moved to Camino. Steam traction engines hauled the timber products 8 miles downhill to the nearest rail link at Placerville until a railroad reached Camino in 1904, retiring the engines. Most of the locals who had shared the roads with the noisy and monstrous machines were happy to see them go. Since the traction engines were costly and inefficient compared to railroads, the rail connection was also a blessing to the El Dorado Lumber Company, where production was increasing rapidly. 1903 output was 16 million, and 1905 jumped to 35 million. The vast majority of lumber produced was sugar pine and ponderosa pine. Quality sugar pine was in demand for door and window sash and pattern making. Lesser grades were used primarily in the box factory. Fir lumber could not be produced at a competitive price with Oregon and Washington mills, but some fir was cut for special purposes such as construction timbers, railroad ties, etc. Out in the woods, the loggers used animal and steam power, except for the fallers and buckers. Efforts to use machines to lighten their load usually proved impractical. Fallers and buckers still used axes and hand saws, and would continue to do so for many years. Steam donkeys had been a great help in moving logs since the early 1880s, however. The engines could skid logs down or up hillsides, pull them along chutes, and load them on rail cars. During the early 1900s, animals were used to pull the cable from the steam donkey out to the logs. And animals might be used to transport logs if the distance involved exceeded the length of the donkey's cable. The El Dorado Lumber Company was making money. By 1906, it owned numerous steam donkeys and related equipment, was operating 3 logging camps, and had purchased 6 additional gear drive locomotives, most of them new. This Climax was bought in 1902 for the Southside Lumber Run and was delivered by a steam traction engine. Engine number 8, a Shay, was the last locomotive to be hauled to the north side by Animal Team. It was also the last engine acquired by the company. A major interest in the firm had been acquired by a bank, which went bankrupt in 1907 and dragged the El Dorado Lumber Company down with it. It would be 4 years before another board was sawn at Pino Grand. In 1911, C.D. Danaher and his brother James bought the assets of the El Dorado Lumber Company. A depressed lumber market probably ensured that the C.D. Danaher Company was none too profitable. During C.D. Danaher management in 1913, engine number 9, a Shay, became the first locomotive to cross the canyon on the cable. It was too big and heavy to make the trip in one piece, however. C.D. left in 1915, and the reorganized company was renamed the R.E. Danaher Lumber Company. A better lumber market helped the company make money, but future prospects were uncertain because the company's 12,000 acres of partially logged timberland could not provide a long-term supply of logs. This problem was solved in January of 1918. John Blodgett, who owned 60,000 acres of adjoining timberland, merged with the Danahers to form the Michigan-California Lumber Company. Michigan was part of the name because both parties had been in the lumber business in Michigan. Blodgett remained there, and headquarters for the new company was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. R.E. and James Danaher were in charge of day-to-day operations and were good managers, apparently. By 1922, Michigan Cal was debt-free, and 1928 profits of $2 million matched the company's declared value. Prosperity allowed the company to consider major improvements, including building a new mill and constructing a railroad to eliminate the cable crossing. The manager's report stated that the 27-year-old sawmill was not as efficient as new designs, while the cable's limited lumber transfer capability weighed against it. Nonetheless, after the studies were analyzed, the directors decided to replace the old cable crossing with a better one. Built beside the old cable and completed in 1928, the new cable supported rail cars carrying 5,000 board feet of lumber, 15 to 20 tons, twice the previous capacity. The routine workload was 30 to 40 trips per day, 150 to 200,000 board feet. Powered by an electric motor placed at the south tower, the new cable crossing was a big improvement, once the bugs were worked out. To the consternation of company officials and the cable contractor, it was early 1930 before satisfactory operation was achieved. Other major changes were made in 1928. A new route for the railroad from South Cable to the summit reduced the adverse grade from 7% to 3%. The planing mill and box factory at Camino were modernized. The dry kilns were moved from Camino to Pino Grand. No major changes were made to the sawmill. Another landmark 1928 decision was to put the company on a sustained yield timber harvest basis. This included cutting only trees exceeding 22 inches in diameter, allowing the remaining trees to grow more vigorously since they had less competition for sun, water, and nutrients. The company planned on an annual production of 30 to 35 million board feet of lumber. This goal would mean acquiring some logs, approximately 25 to 30%, from other sources. This was not foreseen as being a problem, since timber from nearby national forest lands was regularly auctioned off. Despite reservations dating back to at least 1928 regarding the efficiency of the Pino Grand Mill, it continued sawing lumber until 1951, and was only shut down then because a fire destroyed the South Cable Tower in March 1949. The company decided that rebuilding the tower was not practical and started construction of a new mill at Camino in 1950. Meanwhile, lumber had to be hauled from Pino Grande to Camino, and an existing county road received upgrading so it could accommodate heavy truck traffic. When the new mill at Camino was completed, the log hauling was also done solely by trucks. The final curtain was lowered on Michigan Cal's railroad logging era. And what a show it had been! Over the years, Michigan Cal owned 21 locomotives, including 17 gear drives. There had been one Heisler and one Climax, while 15 were the immortal Shays, overwhelmingly the discriminating logger's choice for tough going. The North Side steam equipment, donkeys, and locomotives used wood for fuel most, if not all, their working lives, because it was free and readily available. Wood-fired steam engines did have a propensity for starting fires, but precautions were taken, so most fires were minor. The first few South Side locomotives were wood burners, but were later converted to oil. The end of the cable crossing and railroading were dramatic changes at Michigan Cal. But then all logging methods had changed a lot. The logger's life had improved a lot too, but the work was still hard, dirty, and dangerous.
A logger may get up in the early morning. He may get in when it's late at night. He'll be wet and cold when he works and is pouring. He puts in an honest day and it feels right. Not that we like getting up in the morning, not that we really like working in the rain. We don't like being wet and cold when it's pouring, but it's something that we do just the same. I remember as a child my daddy used to tell me, you need to get good grades and you'd better stay in school. You'd be better off not to follow in my footsteps. If you do, then boy, I've raised a fool. Hard work's not something just anyone wants to do. It's not for everyone, just a very few. Tried to tell me, but I wouldn't listen. He had to let me find out on my very own. Through the school of hard knocks, just to be a logger, it's been the same with everyone I've known. If you don't mind getting up early every morning, if you don't mind being wet and cold through and through, if you don't mind a lot of pain and danger without warning, then boy, I guess this logging is for you. It's not something just anyone wants to do. It's not for everyone, just a very few. Sometimes I think I should have listened to the wisdom, things my daddy told me, I'll tell to my son too. If you don't mind a hard life, working for a living, then boy, I guess this logging is for you. Hard work's not something just anyone wants to do. It's not for everyone, just a very few.
During 1946 and 1947, chainsaws became light enough and reliable enough to gain a few converts. The power saw advocates were soon cutting 2 or 3 times as much timber, and most fallers and buckers had thrown away their hand saws before 1950. For log handling, the animals were long gone, and the lonely and lovely shriek of a steam whistle was seldom heard. The internal combustion engine, first gas, then diesel, was king of the mountains. Michigan Cow was no pioneer in tractor logging. Some loggers were using them by 1915, and their popularity was gaining fast by 1925. But Michigan Cow waited until the late 1920s. By 1935, tractors were doing all their skidding. Charlie Hennings worked for Michigan Cow from 1927 until 1942, and was a cat skinner and tractor mechanic most of that time. This is Charlie operating a gas-engined Cat 60.
Well, to start with, we was logging with old 60s, which was the best they had in them days, and they were underpowered, and most of them were used as skid cats. We had one arch, which was a big, heavy arch, and it was very seldom ever used until in the later part they got 2 Carco arches. They got one with the Cletrax, and then later they bought another one to pull behind the old 60. So from there we was started with using the Cletrax tractors, which Swiftberry went to the logging conference up in Reading, and he seen the first Cletrax there. It looked good to him. Of course, he didn't know much about it, but he finally bought one of them, and they sent it down, and I was the first one to operate it.
Charlie found that the Cletrax Model 80 diesel tractor was a good machine, with one notable shortcoming. It delivered power to both tracks in moderate turns, which was good, but a design fault choked engine power when one track was locked for sharp turns. Since mobility was not as important on the landing, and probably partly because they were paid for, donkeys continued loading logs into the 1940s. Some companies had used log trucks since the early 1900s, but Michigan Cow apparently saw no need for them until the early 40s. The first trucks hauled logs from the woods to Camp 15, where the logs were reloaded onto log cars for the 22-mile trip to Pino Grand. Due to the semi-permanent nature of a sawmill, Pino Grand evolved into a company town with a store, school, and employee housing. Running water and electricity were supplied to the residences. The houses were simple, but this was not deprived living by working man standards. The logging camps were moved occasionally so as to stay reasonably close to the timber harvesting. The small cabins might be called shacks today, but they kept out most of the wind and rain. Conveniences were few. Electricity was not provided. Water was piped to a spot near the cabin. Hot showers were provided, and there was a cookhouse for the loggers. The camps were occupied during the logging season only, April to November, depending on the weather and the timber needs of the mill. In the early days, the camps were for men only, 4 to a cabin. But eventually, wives and families were allowed, and the camps became happier and more civilized. There were no schools, so families stayed in camp during summer vacation only. Emma Hennings. Charlie and Emma married in 1927. A cabin was not available for them during the first 2 logging seasons, so they lived in a tent.
We were married in February, and we went up to Camp 7 in April.
And
What were your living conditions like?
Well, we lived in a tent, 12 by 12, I think it was, tent. And I had a cute little cook stove with an oven, and had to bake our own bread. Because we only came out about once every 3 weeks for supplies, 3 or 4 weeks. So I baked my own bread, and my mother lived in Camino, and she'd buy vegetables and put them on the train and send them up to me once a week. And we bought our meat at the cookhouse.
So all the supplies would come across the cable line, presumably,
Yes.
is that right?
Uh-huh. On the train.
And when you did go to town about once every 3 weeks approximately, you said, did you cross the cable then also?
Oh, no. No, we drove down. No. I crossed the cable one time. That was enough. That was a long ways down there. I don't know. We were just like one big family. The cabins were all close together, and we were just like one big family. The kids all played together, and we didn't do much for recreation during the week. We always went camping and fishing over the weekend most of the time.
Okay, so you probably won't have to go a real long distance to do that either, I wanted to imagine.
No. And I'd load up the bunch of kids and take them down to the swimming hole, the creek, where there was a place for them to swim. And they found their own entertainment besides that, I guess.
Charlie and Emma have 3 children. The young lad in the photo is their son, Charles Hennings III.
Just did typical things a kid do. You know, I used to go down to the saw filer shop and sit and talk to the saw filer all the time. He was a real nice guy, so I went down and talked to him every day almost. I'd go in and spend time with him.
Okay, that saw filer would have not been at Pino Grande, but well, obviously it had to be at the camp.
He was in the logging camp right there. He was just a little ways from our house.
So they had somebody that sharpened the saws for the fallers?
That's all he did, is sharpen saws. That was his job. They come there every morning and picked up fresh saws, and they'd bring them back at night. He had 2 sets of saws, so he filed saws all day long.
Doris Roberts, one of their 2 daughters, shares a few recollections of summer vacations in a logging camp.
Anyway, and then I was a teenager by the time we didn't go to camp anymore. I mean, that was our summer vacation, and that was the vacation that we had. So we went up there and really enjoyed it. We just, we just did things like playing games and hiking around and
Go swimming in Pilot Creek.
yeah, we used to go down and go swimming in the cold, icy water, and we used to go over to Big Silver, and for like spend the weekend, we'd go over and camp overnight there and
Where was that?
swim. Big Silver, it's where Union Valley Dam is now. It's the old campground that we used to stay in no longer exists. It's under the lake, I guess. And we did things that our parents didn't know about, like going down on the creek and climbing up the railroad trestles up to the top of them and stuff like that.
Better roads and vehicles, along with the loggers' desire to come home to their families at night, led to the end of logging camps. The following movie showing Michigan cow lumbering in 1985 was produced by Take One Productions of Sacramento.
The land of never-ending trees and forests. This is nature's garden, as rich in natural resources as it is with history. In 1848, gold was discovered at the headwaters of the American River. Soon afterwards, thousands of pioneers came to this part of California to seek their fortunes. In later years, rugged men struggled against the elements to harvest the forest resources to build the West. Today, the quest for gold is all but ended. Yet, these vast timberlands remain, still producing giant ponderosa, sugar pine, fir, and cedar. Up here on the Crystal Range of the Sierra Nevada, halfway between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe, nature's fertile soil and abundant water along with man's careful management, produce a continuous supply of timber. Trees by the thousands, sometimes reaching over 200 feet high.